Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Elam Road podcast, where on today's show we're going to be going over another home defeat. I think that's 8 at home now without a win if you include the cup competition as well. Just the two of us today. Dan, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. I think it was more of the same at the weekend. I think that record at home, it just shows, we played the more lower sides in the table earlier in the season. Now we're playing those sides away and having some success. So I think overall it looks like, it's been quite predictable in a way this season in terms of our results against sides in and above us. But yeah, a bit more of the same, I think, on Saturday, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. We're gonna get into it. Lack of cutting edge in the final third. The approach didn't really change, and I feel like we're going to address like one of the big things from the top. But just before we get going, remember drop a comment down below. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Elam Road on Twitter, at Elam Road Pod on Instagram. What I was saying there, we're going to get into at the top. Tweet of the week this week. Lots of things on Twitter, especially flying around about mentality a little bit, some about style of play, but I want to focus on a tweet from Ali Milali. And she said, we can pretend all we like that we don't miss Ivan Toney, but with him, at least we would have gotten a result today and quite possibly won that game. Hopefully, Thiago becomes that man. And it's something that our season is kind of hinged on a little bit because we all remember the Newcastle game and how good we looked in that game. And it was because we had that focal point up top, because we could go a little bit more direct when we needed to. And Thiago was really that guy that kind of just locked down their centre backs and allowed the likes of Wissa and Mbumo to kind of come into the game a little bit more and kind of feed off the scraps that he was providing. But it's hard to disagree with that, Dan. I do feel like not last season, okay. I feel like last season we can kind of write Ivan Toney's season off because he came back and he didn't really look like the same player. But particularly in the season we almost got Europe, there was just something, I don't know. There was something about him that you don't feel like he'd take any shit on the pitch. You know that he'd be up for a bit of a fight when he needed to, and you could tell he was kind of more of a natural leader than I would say anyone in our team is at the moment. But what do you think about that tweet in terms of, because there was a lot of chat. I saw a lot of chat about Toney after the game on Saturday.
Yeah, I think leadership wise, that's a different conversation. But I think what we do at least need is different types and different options. And sometimes, particularly against those lower teams, that front three, as it is, it looks dynamic. We can break through teams. We've got pace, we've got power. But there are games where you do need more of a target man type. And, we have brought Igor Thiago in to do that. It's unfortunate, or we can speculate on the reasons as to why he's been out for so long after signing. But it clearly doesn't help to not have those options and the ability to change things up. You look at other teams, Chris Wood at Forest, that they've got big target men, even someone like Mateta at Crystal Palace, which can be another option. And if we had something like that, and with Thiago, potentially we do, but we haven't seen him enough, then, we can maybe change some of these games. And I think it is really difficult. In the situation we're in, when you look at the bench and there's no one really to take over from someone like Wissa if it's not working for him that day. But yeah, I definitely agree. We need the options. Whether Ivan Toney himself is, the solution, he would be obviously very useful. But I think it's more that we just need other options, different types of players there. And I think we have tried to do that with our recruitment. Sharda, to an extent, does offer that aerial threat, but not in the same way necessarily. He's not as empowering as someone like Ivan Toney is, but it's difficult. It is really difficult for a club of our size to get all those options in and to make those substitutions. I mean, Marcus Rashford came off the bench for Aston Villa, and that's the difference ultimately.
Yeah, but we'll talk about the options that Frank had on his bench. There was a couple of more tweets from the usual suspects that I want to mention. Ghost of Champ JC saying, further proof Frank is unwilling to take a risk and doesn't trust any squad player other than the odd few. I think that's a touch harsh considering the options that we had on the bench. But I was surprised not to see Yarmo get a run out, considering that I thought Janelt had his poorest game in a while. We got Uzi, who's actually been not featured in a tweet of the week this season, I don't think, which is odd. But again, in classic Uzi fashion, he said, imagine Brighton, Bournemouth, or even Fulham producing that sort of performance. This team's mentality is pathetic. Already know they're not getting relegated and out of the cup. No accountability. We're going to talk about the game, obviously. I wasn't like disgusted by the performance on Saturday. I feel like in the second half, we kind of gave it all that we had. It's just like you're saying, we just didn't have, there wasn't anyone on the bench who was going to come off and kind of impact the game in the way that we needed the game to be impacted. But I don't know that, and I feel like it's good for tweet of the week because we do see a lot of head loss when we lose, especially like that. But I felt like a little bit on Saturday it was kind of unwarranted. Maybe it was a kind of feeling from everyone that okay, maybe it's not we're not going to get Europe this season, and that was kind of not the nail in the coffin because we're going to talk about Bournemouth as well, and that's a big opportunity to kind of stay in that race. And I'm ever the optimist. I know that you're kind of leaning the other way, but I wasn't. I didn't think it was a poor performance. The first half was a bit frustrating, but Villa are a really good side. They're going well in the Champions League. They're in the quarter kind of for the FA Cup. I know that they've struggled after playing Champions League games in midweeks, but I felt like I think a draw probably would have been a fair result on Saturday. Or am I being too generous?
Perhaps. I mean, the likes of Brighton and Bournemouth, they do have these performances every now and then. They're just more consistent than us. Brighton got pumped 7-0, 4 or 5 weeks ago. So they do put in these performances. We are very rarely heavily beaten in the Premier League. I don't remember us ever really conceding, 5 or 6 or more than that. So we're normally in games. I think it's that level of consistency. We're up against very good teams. I think this is a good season by our standards, but we are looking around us and we're seeing other teams of a similar quality or a similar size have even better seasons. They're having excellent seasons, and I think with a lot of the top teams dropping off, with Tottenham and Man United being in the bottom half, with even City, the likes of Forest are obviously ahead of City, and the likes of Bournemouth and those teams are not far at all behind them. So there is a sense that there was an opportunity there this season if we could step up. I don't think it was an absolutely awful performance. I think if we look back at our games though in recent weeks at home, we've never been completely and utterly outplayed. You've had long spells of possession at times, but it's the lack of ideas and it's the lack of ultimately options on the bench to come on and change the game, which is the frustration. But I think we've got to remember it's a good season. There are other teams having better seasons, but if we compare it even to last season, we've made progress this year.
For sure. I feel like as well with the way that Palace are going, I feel like I'm hearing stats about Palace, and it's just like we were the team to beat them. And I think they've won like 9 of their last, or they've only lost 1 game since the turn of the year, and that game was against us. It's just, but now they've got Adam Wharton back as well. You're looking at the table; we've dropped below them. I'm going to pull the table up a little bit later in the episode for people watching on YouTube, but it places like I feel like if we lose on Saturday, it puts further kind of distance between us and as the chasers and that kind of pack that are kind of in the mix for those top 4. I mean, I don't even think top 4 is really settled yet. It's really, really tight in there. But you're right. I feel like those middling teams this season are very, very good. And we've got another one on Saturday and we're going to talk about it. But let's talk about the Villa game first. First of all, the lineup, Dan. I didn't mind it. I feel like we should probably talk about Fab not being an option on the bench. He's dislocated his shoulder and had surgery, so I don't know when we're going to see him again.
What have they been doing in training?
I don't know. But I feel like as well, we should probably mention the kind of big interview that the club released with Carvalho and some of the things that we've been hearing from like Craig and people like that saying that, some of the outrage about the comments that his dad made or whatever weren't not justified, but they weren't obviously coming from him himself. And it sounded like in that interview that he has had enough from Thomas Frank to suggest that he's not kind of given up on his time at Brentford. I know that he's never going to say that, but he has had a little bit here and there. But again, it just kind of limits our options coming off the bench. So, I mean, in terms of the lineup and the options that we did have that could come on and come into the game, and kind of make a difference, what were your thoughts when it dropped?
Well, didn't have much choice given the injury news. I think I would, if Coyote was fit, I would have maybe liked to have seen him start and Aya go to centre back alongside Collins. But given that the other centre back option is Ben Mee, I think Pinnock deserved to stay in the side. I guess the only other one was much better than against Everton, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think the other one is Jensen, of course, but he's been in and out of injuries all season. We know what he can do at his best, but I think it would have been a bit too early to bring him in for this one. So yeah, I don't have any complaints about the lineup. It is just very frustrating that we don't have those options on the bench. Although I do think on the bench we should, if it's really not working, just try something. I'd perhaps rather Thomas Frank try something than just not do anything at all, even with 5-10 minutes left. There's that young striker from the B team who's been on the bench in the
Morgan.
last few weeks. Yeah, just give him 5 minutes. What's the worst that's going to happen from that? I just, part of me, obviously, we've seen players in the past like Ola Kigbe have minutes, and I don't really expect Morgan to come on and do much, but at least Thomas Frank, has tried something. And we didn't look like scoring in that second half. We had a lot of the ball, apart from KLP hitting the post, which was from a long range effort, which we don't tend to try very much anyway. There was no, wasn't convinced that we was going to score, and that's a frustration. I think at least try something. They're the players we've got. They're the players that are available. Hopefully, in a few weeks, we're hearing positive signs about a few of the players running again and back in training.
Back on the grass.
Back on the grass. As long as there's no setbacks, in a few weeks we could be looking at this and thinking, yeah, we have options on the bench, and that will be the true test as to whether Thomas Frank uses those options. But obviously, in the past with Carvalho, he's not done that enough.
Yeah, no, he hasn't. He's not had the opportunities. Isn't it so strange that potentially out of the ones that have been like perennially injured since like the start of kind of a couple of seasons ago, Aaron Hickey is the first one that we probably could see back on the pitch, because I read something that he was kind of ready to come back after the international break. He's in full training. Rico Henry is a bit more delicate. Igor Thiago and Gustavo Nunes are just back on the grass, but we don't really know what back on the grass means. But it's, if there was a time for players to be coming back, then it's obviously useful for it to be sort of towards the back end of the season when it looks like we're kind of running out of ideas. But let's talk about the game a little bit. I feel like we've kind of spoken about how passive we've been at times this season in terms of our out of possession shape. It meant in that first half, Villa were basically camped in our half the entire 45, it felt like. Were you frustrated with how deep we were? They had a few chances. I'd probably say they were probably quite unlucky to not go in at the break with a goal, because they did have that Mings chance from the free kick was the one that stands out. If he gets like a clean contact on that and puts it either side of Flecken, it doesn't even need to be that hard. They would have gone in at 1-0 up. But I don't know whether to be frustrated with how deep we were, because I've mentioned how good, they are a good side. We can't take that away from them. They are a really good side. But yeah, were you frustrated from the first half?
I think it's about managing stages of the game. So there'll be periods where Villa are on top and we might need to go into that low block. But I would like to see us come out more. I mean, there was, I think, sometime in the first half, there is that period where we almost caught him out at the back. And, if Wissa got it under control, he could have almost had a tap in. So it's frustrating with the home team. We've got good players. Villa, after a European night, they've not been on very good form in the Premier League, particularly after those European nights. So it would have been nice to see us do more. I think we didn't give away as many clear-cut chances as we did against Everton. I thought we did defend relatively well. I thought the free kick that Ming should have scored from, that was a bit poor in terms of the defending for that, and we would have been really disappointed, I think, if that had gone in. But yeah, that's what we do. I mean, there's two teams in the game. So Villa are a very good team. We've got to accept that they're going to have periods where they're in the ascendancy. And normally we can be very good in that low block. And I'm assuming the plan was to break with more regularity. And that's when you might want a big striker up top. And you can, break forward with pace with that front three. But yeah, we didn't do it enough. And even in the second half, we had more of the ball, we had more territory, but we just kept slinging crosses into the box. And the likes of Tyrone Mings against Johan Wissa was, you always knew who was going to come on top there.
Just to give you that stat on Villa around Champions League hangovers, prior to this fixture, Villa had failed to win their previous 7 matches played after a European game, collecting just 3 points in the process. That was a very Brentford thing that you could have predicted before the game. And I know that Brentford fans did predict that before the game. But second half, Dan, you mentioned it there, Ollie Watkins. Oh, God. Every 6th goal in 7 games against us now. Collins, for me, I feel like he's allowed this error, but he just, like they mentioned it on Match of the Day, but he's got to get a tighter to him, and it allows him to kind of drive into the box, and then as soon as he gets his shot away, it could go anywhere, and it obviously takes the deflection, goes through Flecken's legs. But another one that the defensive coaches will be really frustrated with, because it's avoidable. The fact that Watkins even had so much room to just kind of burst down the left and then come into our penalty area pretty much unchallenged until Collins decides to surrender his territory a little bit. But I feel like, I don't know, am I being harsh? I feel like Collins has been so good this season. It's difficult to kind of criticize him too much, but I feel like he could have done better for Watkins' goal.
Yeah, if the defender's out of position and not there, the whole defense has to shuffle across. The danger's there. You know, Collins went to make a block and it deflected off him, but he's got to be closer to him. He's got to be so much closer to him. I'm not sure whether Flecken maybe should just close his legs. It's not very good. It's not a very good look, and I'm sure Craig, if he was on here, would have something to say about it. But
He would.
it's yeah, he's not here, so I'll say something about it. I think it's disappointing for any keeper to get done at your near post like that when it goes through your legs. So I think Flecken maybe should have done a little bit better there too. I know it took a deflection, so that you have to take that into account. But yeah, Collins should have done better as well. Collins needs to be getting closer to him. And it's even more frustrating that we just completely switched off again at the beginning of the second half. And I think we've done that a few times this season. And we were lucky not to go 2-0 down just seconds later.
Well, yeah, the Rodgers second goal, that kind of, I felt like, I know you said earlier that it didn't feel like we were going to score, but I feel like when that goal got disallowed and you hear the roar from the crowd and we kind of get up for it a little bit, the game kind of peters out until we get those penalty shouts, and we should talk about them because I feel like the refereeing performance from Jared Gillett wasn't amazing. I tweeted something out just to say, "Wow!" I'd had a few beers by that point, so that's probably. I know I don't normally slander refs on Twitter, but I just felt like with the frustration around the game, the fact that we didn't really have many chances when you want those kind of fine margins to go your way, they didn't. And there's two. There's kind of Disassi and Cash together on Sharda. I think Disassi kind of goes through Cash and then Cash knocks into Sharda, and then there's one just Disassi against Sharda on their own. From where I stood, right, the second one, Disassi on Sharda, looked genuinely like the most blatant pen that I've ever seen in my life. I was waiting for him to point to the spot. Having watched it back, I still think it's a pen. I can't lie. I still do think it's a pen. I don't know where you stand on both of them, but I feel like the second one is probably more nailed on than the first, just because on the first one, Cash gets a touch before he gets to the ball, and then Disassi just kind of slips and takes both of them out. But your thoughts?
I think there's an argument for both. I think the first one, Disassi doesn't mean to go into that challenge, but you know, if you fall over and you take someone out in the box, it's still a penalty. It doesn't matter whether you intended to do it or not. And the fact they were talking about a match of the day, whether you know they thought Sharda could get to the ball or not, and whether that would have an impact. Still, I think if you take someone out in the box, you've got a good shout for a penalty. The second one, you can clearly see his hand at one point go almost to Sharda's chest, and it is a shove. So I would suspect if either of those were given on the pitch, they would have stayed given. Yeah. And it's one of them, which is the frustration, because if you have a different referee on a different day and they give it, VAR don't overturn that either. So it's, you know, we can feel hard done by to an extent, but it's just how it works, I suppose. If you're trying to achieve perfection, you know, you've got to look at everything then.
There are, whenever we play Villa, there are always these little flashpoints. I swear, maybe not in the reverse fixture this season, but you know, the red card to me last year, the Watkins thing last year as well, the celebration. But I know that you said it didn't feel like we were going to score, but I felt like if we'd have got one of those pens at the time when the crowd was most up for it, I really do think we could have gone on to maybe get a winner from the game, which is what makes it even more frustrating. But you mentioned KLP hitting the post, which is about as close as we came, other than the penalty shouts, really, to a clear goal scoring opportunity, and it wasn't even that. But it's not really good enough when you consider the pressure and the possession that we had, and like we kind of spent the entire second half sort of in their half. So from that possession and from that territory to accumulate 0.64 xg, despite you know that momentum and that pressure, what does it point to, Dan? Is it just I hasten to kind of criticize Frank too much, but there has been a common theme where it's like when we're chasing a game, we just don't really know other ways to break down the low block that we find ourselves up against. And it kind of goes back to the Ivan Toney thing when we had that kind of option up top. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to put it all down to injuries, because it's like if we had Thiago throughout the whole season, then we would have that dynamic, but we just don't. And when we don't have that, you're right. It's just bread and butter for Tyrone Mings and Disassi, who were phenomenal. They were so good. Didn't give Wissa or Mbumo or Sharda a sniff the whole game, really. But 0.64 xg at home with all that possession, all that momentum, it's not really good enough, is it?
No, it's one dimensional in a way, because you know as soon as Brian Mbumo gets it on the right and he cuts in, he's going to try and cross it. You know, we've got to try different ways to play. depending on who's on the pitch. Wissa is quite good in the air for someone of his height, but he's not going to beat the likes of Tyrone Mings. Sharda, probably needs to shift more into the middle if we're going to start doing that. In the hope that
But
he
that
might
doesn't
get
work either. That doesn't really work either, though. We've tried that, and
That's what I mean. So we've got to change something. We've got to try and be more dynamic. More low crosses. Getting Damsgaard into tight areas and seeing what he can do creatively. I don't think we're that used to playing against low blocks in the Premier League. Teams typically won't set up that way against us, but it's more likely to happen, of course, when a team's defending a lead, and we've got the momentum with us. So it's difficult. I mean, set pieces is another thing. We've got to do more from set pieces. We've got to try different routines. We've got to get in their faces more. Again, whereas up against a goalkeeper who's not their first choice keeper, could we have put him under more pressure? Could we have done something to maybe force a mistake from him? It's very difficult as a second choice keeper who's not normally playing, to just get into the rhythm of things straight away. And I think early on with Villa were a bit messy playing out from the back early on, and we almost took advantage. So we've got to try different things. And Keith Andrews has done a good job in terms of defending set pieces, but going forwards, we've lost a bit of that extra magic that we used to have, with things like corners, especially because we get a lot of them. Because these crosses come in, a Villa player will win it, but quite often a Villa player will send it out for a corner. We've got to then make more of these situations. And yes, Thomas Frank can only work with what he's got, but we've got to try something different. We've got to try, I want to see us try new ways of trying to attack. And that's not easy either. There's not much space when they play in a low block, but the likes of Damsgaard, he can unlock defenses. We've seen some of the passes he's played. He didn't really get into this game as much as he has done in previous games. But if we can unlock someone like him, maybe get Jensen on a bit earlier as well, because he can do that from a deeper position. We've got to just try something different, because it just seemed like there's more of the same every time we went forward, and every time we got a corner, I don't really get excited for it because I kind of know what's coming next.
Damsgaard's delivery wasn't great on Saturday. It rarely beat the first man, and that's like one of the most frustrating things from a set piece that you can ever see. But I'm just looking at the stats. We accumulated 0.05 xG from set pieces against Villa. Considering how many corners we had, we've got to be getting more. And I do feel like once Jensen is fit, I do feel like that optimal midfield three, we've spoken about it for what seems like ages, but Jensen's delivery, I think, is probably the best that we've got, I would probably say, from a dead ball. But yeah, no, Damsgaard, he struggled to kind of get into the game on Saturday, especially in the first half. You could see him trying to find the space in midfield. And I feel like Tielemans just kind of marked him out of the game a little bit, whilst offering a lot himself going forward. And that was kind of key in terms of getting out. But even sort of in the second half, when Villa were kind of camped in their box, he just struggled to kind of get into the game a little bit. But, I'm not never, ever going to go too heavy on the Damsgaard criticism, because, I feel like he's only really got a couple of quiet games in him before he gets back to his best. And I do feel like against Bournemouth, he probably will have a better impact on the game, particularly. But it annoyed me a little bit, because I felt like in the reverse fixture at their place on a Wednesday night, Damsgaard was head and shoulders above the rest of our team, and he had a lot of joy against them, despite everyone else not playing really well. So I think he'll be personally a bit gutted with himself. The other player that I want to talk about is Sharda, because getting some stick from the usual suspects, and like I've been one to give him stick this season as well. But I didn't think he was poor on Saturday. I felt like out of the front line, I felt like he was probably the most threatening. Am I watching a different game, Dan?
Yeah, I think he was. I don't think that says a lot, because someone like Brian Mbeumo again had a bit of a stinker again, and I'm not saying we should substitute Brian Mbeumo, but if we had the options on the bench,
Yeah.
I think we should perhaps take him off in some of these sorts of games. Obviously, that wouldn't have been possible for this one, but yeah, he was positive. I mean, he almost won the 2 penalties, and that's through his pace and power. I think he worries teams. There was a couple of times where he went to receive the ball in the box, didn't quite get a shot away quick enough, but he has a lot of qualities. He is arguably one of the more well-rounded players, because he's quick, he's strong, he's quite strong for given his size. You'd assume he's quite strong, and aerially he can win those duels. And I think we needed him in this type of game, particularly when Brian Mbeumo wasn't really on it at all. and a lot of our best moments involved him in some way. So I think he's improved. I think recently he's been more consistent as well. I think since the new year, he's
Yeah.
put in more consistent performances, scored a few crucial goals, like the one at Palace. I still want to see more from him, but I think we can see him growing as a player. Now he's got regular starts. He's not been on the bench for a while. And I don't think he should be used as any kind of scapegoat for this game, because he was certainly no worse than anyone else in the side.
Yeah, so I 100% agree. I was surprised to see so much stick come his way after that performance. Like there's been other performances where people haven't criticised him and he's dropped a stinker. So it's just weird. I feel like with Shada particularly is another one of those like kind of divisive players that people have differing opinions about, like kind of their potential, but also differing opinions about the way they play. Which is kind of a common theme of Brentford. I want to mention KLP because I actually thought he was our best player at left back, which is quite worrying when you're 1-0 down. But obviously, he continues to put a shift in at left back and it will go unnoticed. And when we have Rico Henry back, he's obviously going to have a bit of a fight on his hands to keep his position in the team. But again, just like a really accomplished performance. There were so many times in that second half where it looked like Villa were going to break. And he's just like he's added a lot more calmness to that back line. I feel like maybe a little bit more than Rico Henry would, because Rico Henry relies on his pace a lot. KLP can't really do that. But obviously, I would say KLP on the ball is much better than Rico Henry on the ball. But I want to give a shout out to KLP because I did think he was immense. Thomas Frank's substitutions called into question again. I don't really know. I feel like we're looking at the options on the bench. We had Frederick, who's a B team player, Jensen, Kim Ji-soo, who came on, Konak, who hasn't featured, I don't think, this turn of the year. Magoma didn't come on. Ben Mee, Morgan, who was the B team player that you mentioned earlier, Valdemarson and Yarmo. But I don't know. He's clutching at straws a little bit with the kind of options that he actually has. But we have kind of talked about Thomas Frank's game management at times and his kind of reluctance to maybe try things differently when we're not winning. But I don't know. Like a general wrap of the game, Dan, before we kind of talk about the big picture, I don't want to get too disheartened about it, just because I feel like Saturday is probably more crucial in terms of where our season wants to be. But last comments on the game before I let you talk about sort of prioritization of different competitions, because I know that you love to talk about that.
I used to be the optimistic one on this show. I used to be the one saying we're going to get into Europe, and now I've turned the other way in recent weeks. It was more of the same, I think, against a good side, which we've seen a lot this season. We struggled to create. It wasn't an awful performance. Thomas Frank would probably say we deserved a draw. Perhaps on another day we would have got a draw with the penalties, and we'd be talking about something different. But we need things like that to go our way at the moment to beat these sides, when we're not getting it. I thought Jensen should have come on a bit earlier. But otherwise, yeah, with the subs, there's not a lot we could have really done, apart from maybe give, one or two of the younger players, if they're good enough to be on the bench, you would have thought we'd be prepared to use them. So maybe do that. But I honestly think that would have impacted the game and changed the result? Probably not.
Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like the options on the bench are extremely limited at the moment. So we're kind of, after that international break, after the Bournemouth game, if we can get some bodies at least kind of as an option on the bench, let alone kind of starting from the off, it would be good for us. But just kind of big picture wise, I've pulled the Premier League table up for people watching on YouTube so that they can see as well. That loss dropped us down. Palace are above us now and look like they're going really strong. Fulham lost at the weekend, but Brighton look like the team that Brighton were in a like kind of poor run of form, and they've kind of just picked up since that 7-0 against Forest. I feel like they keep winning games, and it's just so tight. Like from City in fifth, 47, down to kind of Fulham in 10th on 42. It's unbelievably tight, and it puts a lot of. I think it does not put a little pressure, because I don't really feel like Brentford are playing with pressure at the moment. But in terms of our season in general, Dan, you do kind of feel like a loss on Saturday to pull us further away from the pack would be, I don't want to say devastating, because I'm never going to write it off like you would, but I just think it could look, that gap starts to look a little bit insurmountable with teams like Palace starting to hit form, and Bournemouth, if they win on Saturday, will pick up their first win in 3 games. Aston Villa look like they're going from strength to strength. Brighton look very good. Newcastle, again, another really strong team. Obviously, they've got the cup final to focus on, but they're going to be focused on getting back into Europe as well. What are you thinking in terms of the bigger picture?
I'm thinking it's too much. It's too much to catch them. But looking at that, I mean, what we needed to do really is just turn some of those losses into draws. If you look at the number of games they've all lost and the number of games we've won, we're up there in terms of
Yeah.
winning the games. Tight games like Saturday. If we can just get a draw out of it, there's been a few more this season as well. If we can just sneak a point, that would have made a lot of difference. I think we're losing too many games at the moment. They're all losing 6 or 8 games. We've lost 12, so I can't see it. I can't. Even if we were to win on Saturday, we've got Newcastle away after that, and we have a terrible record there. We've got Chelsea at home. Okay, potentially, if we really perform, they're not actually playing that well at the moment. Possibly. Then we've got Arsenal away for all their problems in terms of goal scoring. Are we really got to go there and win? I'm not convinced at all. And then we've got Brighton and Forest. So I'm just not convinced we can be consistent enough over these coming games. I think we might maybe win 1 or 2, but we need to do a bit more than that to, overcome what's now, a 7-point gap to Villa in 8th.
What do you
I
think
can't see
about?
it.
You mentioned before we started recording about the sort of prioritization of the league over cups. Is that kind of what makes it a little bit? I know we can't. You're kind of treading a fine line as a Brentford fan between not trying to sound ungrateful and being grateful for the position that we're in and the fact that we're in the Premier League and we got so close to Europe and expectations rise, but at the same time, it just does feel like if we're beating all the teams below us and we're losing to all the teams above us, then we're going to be mid-table. So an opportunity to go far in a cup would have really kind of made the season memorable. Let us know in the comments what you think of that, because I feel like people think we kind of bang on about that a little bit too much. But I feel like it is an opportunity miss. You look at the teams that are left in the FA Cup: Brighton, Villa, Bournemouth, Fulham, Palace, Preston, and Man City. There's an opportunity that one of those teams is going to be in the final, alongside potentially Man City. But one of those kind of middling clubs is going to be in the final. And if you look at how tight it is on the table, then there's no suggestion that any one of them is going to kind of run away with it. I don't feel like the gap between Newcastle to kind of Palace and Brentford is that big, with the caveat of when we have a full squad. Like if we did have a full squad, we go far into these competitions, you can utilize the injuries when they come back. I don't know. People are going to not
We've
like
got to
it.
be ambitious. Every
Yeah.
team's got to be ambitious. There's no guarantee that in 5-10 years we'll still be in the position we're in. We're now in a position where we can go for something like this. When we were playing Plymouth, it was quite clear in the league table. We're still around 11th or 12th. There was still a bit of a gap. It was quite clear that it's still very much a long shot for us to get into that top 8. So why not just play a few more of the senior players from the start against Plymouth, get that game won. You can take players off if we then go 2 or 3-0 up. I know they then went on to draw Liverpool and then City, so we may, I don't know how the ball numbers were, but we could have then gone on to play those teams. But they've all got their own weaknesses. Liverpool have other things to focus on. City aren't as good as they used to be. There would have been a chance here, and for a club of our size with the injuries we're having, we've got a much better chance, I think, of just winning one-off games here and there than we do in order to put the level of consistency in terms of our form together to break into that top 8. And I think the players, obviously, they won't say that they don't believe we're going to get into Europe this season, but they must recognize it is very much a long shot. And there is a danger now, especially when we get to 6 or 7 games left, that you take their eye off the ball a bit. They take it easy a little bit because we're safe. We haven't got any of those concerns that we had last year, which is a good thing. But there is nothing really tangible to aim for that would really cause us to give the extra 5-10%. And you see that at the end of every season. Often those teams in mid-table are the ones you want to play. You don't want to play the relegation battlers, and you don't want to play the top 6 or 7 because they're really fighting for something. So it's a shame. It's a real shame. And obviously the teams that have gone out the FA Cup would have just given us an even bigger opportunity, and even getting to semi-finals and a day out of Wembley would have been really something to remember this season by. And there's no guarantee that next season will be as good. If the likes of Brian and Bumo moves on and we sign someone who's out for 12 months to replace him, which could really happen, then we could be in a struggle again next season. So we can be grateful for where we are and also want to be ambitious. because these times might not last forever. So these are the times that we should be going for it, because that was surely what we primarily had to play for back in January. So we'll keep going on about it, but uh, yeah, I know it's divisive. I know people have different ideas about it, but I just don't see where we're going if you're not prioritizing that in terms of what's realistic.
Let us know in the comment section down below around that kind of chat around FA Cup, Carabao Cup, League. Now it looks like a finish outside the European places is probably the most likely position. But Dan, I'm ever the optimist, mate. Listen, 3 points on Saturday against Bournemouth is a team that Thomas Frank has never lost to in terms of him against Iraola. And I actually found out that the last time Bournemouth took 3 points off Brentford was all the way back in 2014. If you don't count that playoff semi-final first leg in the Championship. Listen, mate. I know that you're a pessimist now, but if we get 3 points on Saturday, you keep the pace, you keep things up. I know what you mean. I know that we've not maybe got the kind of bodies to put a consistent run together, but you have the international break. Maybe we start to see some of them returning. I don't know. How are you feeling ahead of Saturday? Because I feel like the reverse game against Bournemouth was weird because they were very much on top for the first kind of 20 minutes, half an hour. Probably could have been home and dry after the first 20 minutes, half an hour, if I'm remembering correctly. They had 2 or 3 like high quality chances that they didn't put away. But after that, we played some really nice football. We didn't concede late, which we all thought that we were going to, especially our third guy. I remember Wissa, the kind of interplay between, was it KLP and Yanel, and the through ball that he put through to Wissa, who then dicked it over the keeper. But it was a really good game. And I feel like Iraola and Frank, those two styles of managers, they do contribute to good games. And maybe that's just Bournemouth in general. But there's always goals when Brentford play. So how are you feeling around Saturday?
I think there is reason to be optimistic around this one. I think Bournemouth are quite a weird team. We always seem to do quite well against them. But then you watch them play against, some of the best teams, and they're really, really good, and they're really impressive. I don't think we've ever seen quite that version of Bournemouth against Brentford. So maybe to an extent he matches up. Thomas Frank matches up to them really well. I think if we do sit at times in a lower block, I don't think Bournemouth will necessarily like that, because they're a bit like us in some ways. They like to break forward quickly. They've got quite a dynamic attacking players. So we could almost potentially play them at their own game, and we could be successful in that. So as an isolated game, I think we have a chance. We have a chance away at Bournemouth. I think it makes a difference as well that their home atmosphere. It's a small ground. It's a tight ground. Probably something the players are a bit more used to in terms of obviously playing at the G-Tech. It's not as intimidating as some venues can be, and I think that can have an impact. Thinking of Newcastle as well, the game after, we have a terrible record there. So I can see there's reasons for positivity, but we've got to be wary as well, because we know how good Bournemouth can be, and that they're not. It's not an accident where they are in the table. That they're very capable, if we don't turn up, of turning us over. So as an isolated game, I think we've got a chance, and then that would be a start in terms of trying to climb the table. But if we don't back that up quite consistently in our games following that, which are also very, very difficult games, I just can't see us breaking into that top 8. And I don't think we do have the consistency in us to do that.
One thing I will tell you for free though, Dan, I don't think the away day from last season will ever be topped. I feel like that might be my favourite away day following Brentford in a very, very long time. That was one of those games, like mid-table, nothing to play for. Both teams kind of comfortably safe on the beach, and it was on the beach. It was on the beach. It was sunny.
So hot, wasn't it? It was in the summer. Great. We had just found out the week or two before that we're definitely staying up. Yeah, it was really, really good. Yeah, it was really good. There was no goals, there was it, until right at the end. All 3 goals right at the end. But
yeah, with Brian and then Solanke and then Wissa.
Yeah, it was nice not to worry about anything that day. But now we've got the stress of trying to get European football when it's probably not going to happen, or you do anyway.
No, we have to keep the faith. We have to keep the faith. So I think 3 points on Saturday would be huge. And I think, like you said, they've got some really, really interesting attacking players. I think Evan Nilsson's back now. They definitely should have beat Spurs on the weekend. I don't know how they managed to fluff that one up. But they've got the likes of Cliver, who looks like a player kind of reborn. I feel like he's been one of the players of the season so far. Semenyo's a really good player. They've got Tavernier back now. They've got a lot of good players. And obviously they've got like the standout centre-back pairing, or one of the standout centre-back pairings of the season, in Howson and Zabani. and they've got Kirkes as well. So I think it's going to be a really good game, but I feel like there might be a little bit of weight in what you said in terms of playing them at their own game, sitting back a little bit, looking to hit them on the break, because I feel like not necessarily that's where we had the joy in the first game, but if we did kind of do that, I do see the parallels in that maybe they might struggle to break us down a little bit. Whereas against Spurs, two of like the same kind of styles, they're both going at each other, and you feel like Bournemouth have a little bit more potency in attack at the moment. Yeah. But Dan, I think that'll be a good place to round off the podcast. The Ealing Road podcast will be back with a Bournemouth preview in the week, and there's going to be a video on my channel as well. I'm not going to say too much about that because I don't actually know what I'm doing yet, but there will be a video on my channel this week, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts ahead of the Bournemouth game. How you feeling about it? How you feeling about our European hopes? Did anyone impress you particularly on Saturday against Villa? Let us know in the comment section down below, along with everything that we've spoken about in today's video. We love kind of seeing the interaction between you guys and us, and I tried to reply to as many comments as we can. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channel. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram, and we shall see you in the week with the Bournemouth preview. Dan, it's been a pleasure as always.
Up the bees.
There we go.